Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. My name's Aaron. I'm the global CTO of Sage. Raise your hand if you've heard of Sage. You know who it is? That's really cool. For those of you who don't know who it is, Sage is a global software company. We sell accounting and payroll, HR, back office, manufacturing. We've got about 170 products that we sell globally. We're a UK-listed, London-based or Newcastle-based company, and what I'm going to talk about today is the relationship between AI and trust, which is pretty critical to what we're doing in the way we develop our products. I want to start just by sharing my resume with you, which is very, very short. So in the late 90s, I went to work for Arthur Andersen. Do you guys remember Arthur Andersen? Huge betrayal of trust there. Arthur Andersen, when I was hired, was the most respected of the big six at the time. Global accounting firms. Just after I left, they completely disappeared off the face of the planet by destroying trust in markets over the Enron scandal, the WorldCom scandal. And just so we're clear, I left beforehand and I had nothing to do with it. But I was a terrible, terrible, terrible consultant. So I moved out to Silicon Valley early 2000, and I joined the founding team of a company called Intact. And I've had that job ever since. So it took a long time to build Intact into something that was successful. 17 years later, we sold the business to Sage, and I transitioned to be the global CTO at Sage. So why do I tell you all that? Well, first of all, I've been doing the same job for 23 years now, which means that I've got a lot of stories to tell about this particular topic that's super, super important to me. So what I'm not going to do today is give you a bunch of regulations and standards and very specific guidelines on what you do. What I'm going to try to do instead is give you some principles, tell you some stories, really get you thinking at more of the business level, right, the commercial level, about really the importance of trust when you're building an AI solution. So let me start with a story. Early in the pandemic, we were calling a lot of customers to just kind of get a sense of what's happening in the world of our customers around the world. I was speaking to a small company in the Midlands in England. They did paving stones, and it was a small mom and pop shop, literally, right? The husband ran the store. The wife did all the bookkeeping and the accounting, and so I called her because she had left us a negative review. So I really wanted to talk to this woman, find out what's going on. And it's, as a CTO, you need to do that, or you completely lose trust, or lose touch with what's going on with your customers and your products. As the conversation progressed, she told me about the difficulty she was having tracking all of her cash flow, and how much time she was spending just reconciling her bank account. And I knew that with the product she was using, we had a fully automated bank reconciliation feature. Went out to your bank account, downloaded all the transactions, matched the transactions, uses AI to classify them. So I asked her if she was using it. And to my great sadness, her response was, "No, I don't trust it." And when I really dug in, it had nothing to do with whether she thought it was secure, whether she thought we were taking care of her data in a disciplined way. It was entirely due to the fact that if she lost track or made a single mistake in reconciling cash, they might miss payroll. They might not be able to get their next supplement in and paid for and lose a relationship with a vendor. So she was so concerned about handing that off to technology that she just wouldn't do it. And that's basically what I'm going to try to share with you today, is it doesn't matter how cool your product is. It doesn't matter how sexy the AI is. If your customers don't trust it, they won't use it. So I'm going to take you through we're going to talk about why it's important first, and then I'm going to take you through the 4 layers of trust. So trust is getting more and more important as technology evolves. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, the impact a technology company could have on the world was sort of limited. But as we're now getting into networks and AI and a lot of really powerful public cloud computing, the impact large technology companies can have on the world is far greater, and therefore we have to accept more responsibility. So our whole attitude about technology has to change. So here's a couple of themes that are driving that. So the first is digital transformation, right? It's only accelerating now. It means that human work is being replaced with technology. That means humans then have to trust the technology to take over for the work they've been doing. Number two, AI, which is the biggest factor driving digital transformation, has an incredible opportunity to do harm. The whole purpose of AI is to replicate human decision-making. When you replicate human decision-making at lightning speed, if that decision-making is flawed, you can do massive, massive harm. Number three, society's got greater expectations. They're more sophisticated. My 23, 24-year-old son is still on iOS 8 and an old Apple phone because he doesn't want to upgrade. He knows he's sort of playing into their world and giving them his data, and he's giving up his privacy. And number four, we have to be really honest with ourselves as an industry. Trust has been abused. I mean, we can all probably rattle off 3 or 4 examples of where big tech companies have abused the trust of their customers. So customers are they're already coming into this with a bit of a jaded view on what we're doing with their trust. And then last of all, and this is something that I learned as I started to build out our AI team at Sage, you can't build AI without the participation of your customers. You just can't do it. What you're trying to do is automate what they do manually, replicate their decision-making, use their data to train the AI, and if they don't work with you on that journey, you're not going to build a good solution. So you have to have their trust to partner with you as you're building AI. So what I'm going to go through, and it gets even worse, by the way, with large language models. Everything that I just described is now magnified and accelerated with large language models. I don't have to explain what ChatGPT is, right? Okay. All right, and we're all really aware of hallucinations and all the problems with ChatGPT. Okay, I think the thing that's relevant though with large language models like GPT is that the hallucinations are so confident, right? It is very difficult to detect when a large language model is giving you a wrong answer, right? And so it makes that trust even harder to attain with this technology. So I'm going to talk about 4 layers of trust today. So table stakes, this is what you have to do to play the game. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'll give you a couple of views on how it matters commercially in the way you build a successful business, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'll talk about some principles that you should follow in building trust into your technology, into your products. I'll talk about the importance of customers trusting your company and what you can do and what you shouldn't do to retain customer trust in the company. And then lastly, what I think is the great prize is where can we actually use technology to create trust, to improve trust. We've got a purpose at Sage, which probably sounds like it's corporate do-goodery. We hired a consulting firm to give us we came up with this ourselves. Our purpose is to knock down barriers so everyone can thrive. Why do we believe that? Because we serve small and medium businesses who are the engines of their communities. If we can help those small businesses to succeed, and if we can make the markets they operate in more fair and equitable, we really can knock down barriers. And so I really do believe strongly that we can get to the point where we're using technology to create trust. Okay, so table stakes. You're going to learn through my stories today that I suffer a lot from Dunning-Kruger. You guys know the Dunning-Kruger effect. You think you're smarter than you really are until you start to learn a subject, and then you realize you're really dumb. And then when you're really, really smart, you don't think you're as smart as you think you are, right? That's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I've got it in spades. When I first started building the AI team at Sage, I thought I understood ethical AI, right? I thought that it was all about having a diverse data science team, about having unbiased data sets and unbiased data labeling, and if you just take care of all that, you're going to be fine. Well, the reality is that that's just skimming the surface. And I'll give you an example. We're going to get to the example in a minute. All right, the table stakes. Another example of Dunning-Kruger, by the way. When you get into the world of building a product that has regulations that apply to it, there are more than you think. Your product is going to be, it's going to have more applicable regulations than you probably realize. I built the slide this way deliberately to sort of try to overwhelm you with everything out there. Now, things like GDPR and CCPA, those are sort of generally applicable, right? If you're doing business in Europe, you have to abide by the rules of GDPR. CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's California only, but The internet doesn't know state boundaries, right? So if you're building a product in the US, you've got to abide by it. But most of these have to do with the markets that you're going after. So for example, PIPEDA is related to defense, working with government, right? CAPA is protection of children, right? So it also gets into your customers, the markets, et cetera. And then, of course, you've got all of your cybersecurity regulations. Some of them are very broad and apply to most companies. Others get into very specific features like payment processing. So 2 points that I want to make to you on this, right? You can't play the game if you don't abide by the regulations that apply to you, period, right? Don't even do it. But there is an advantage. So most customers don't actually understand what regulations apply. It's not uncommon for a customer to expect you to comply with a regulation that you really don't need to. And when you can have that conversation with a customer that says you do comply with this, what it does is it simplifies the customer trust conversation. Right? In the early days of Intact, I had to get on the phone all the time with customers to convince them that their data is secure on the internet. These are the early days, right? It wasn't until we started to be able to tell customers that we complied with SOC 2 or we complied with PCI DSS. All we had to do was say that we comply with that, and the conversation's over, even if they don't have to comply with those themselves. Right? So it's a very, very efficient way to close down that customer trust conversation. The second thing, which I think is really, really important, is that the compliance is valuable. So the most expensive add-on for Sage Intacct is HIPAA. HIPAA requires an incredible level of detailed auditing of access of personal information. And it became a market advantage for us to build capabilities to support HIPAA-regulated companies. And in return, those companies, because there's a narrow set of companies that do this, and they know how hard it is, and it's so valuable to them, they pay us a lot for it. So don't throw out these regulations because they seem onerous to you. Look at the market opportunity first, right, before you decide that you're not going to comply with one of these. Okay, so moving on to the first layer, which is trust the tech, and you know what I'm going to do here is talk about the ethics, product design, those sort of things, and I do want to come back to this Dunning-Kruger thing, and you know how naive I was in the early days. The story here is the World Bank is supporting a number of countries with loans to support impoverished families, and they've created a technology that was meant to make it more fair and equitable, but also more efficient, right? So money could get to those who needed it faster. Really, really good intentions. They failed miserably. It was designed by people who didn't understand what poverty looked like in the countries they were trying to serve. They were using data where actually the infrastructure in the country wasn't able to provide accurate data. They weren't aware of laws that governed the way things were counted in countries. And the result of this was that what was already an unfair and inefficient system became more unfair, right? And it was because they didn't really go into this with this humble attitude. And so you may have heard this at the congressional hearings about GPT. I think I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it was the head of data privacy from IBM who said that old mantra of move fast and break things, you know, really doesn't apply anymore. And what I would argue is we've got to replace that with humility and accountability. If we are going to take this technology and really try to tackle these kinds of problems and create this magical value, we've got to approach it with humility, right? That we really don't know all the answers, and we have to be willing to account for the mistakes that we make along the way. The question you should ask is, are you qualified to solve this problem without doing harm? Are we at Sage qualified to create a product that uses AI to assess the creditworthiness of a small business? Sounds like a good thing. We could probably make money on that. I don't think we should do it. Too much risk, right? We could really cause harm if we make it very easy for a bank to look at accounting data and very quickly make a lending decision that's probably going to be skewed by factors outside of what's in the accounting data, right? So ask yourself with some humility, are you willing to take on the accountability for what happens when this goes wrong? Assuming that you say no to that, there are ways to mitigate, right? None of us have the diversity that we need in our data science teams. We just don't, right? Engineering teams are not diverse. We're working on it, right? But gender diversity is still a huge problem in product development. So it's going to be rare for you to say yes to that question with your own resources. So 3 things. So number 1, you have to, within your organization, especially as your organization grows, you have to define clear principles that are more for the colleagues in the business about what you will and what you won't do with AI, right? It's got to be very, very clear on what kinds of problems you'll tackle. Number 2, you've got to establish advisory councils. So we do this in 2 ways at Sage. We're developing an employee advisory council that's made up of a diverse representation of colleagues from around the world with different backgrounds that, we share what we're doing. We share the roadmap, we get their feedback, and we have customer advisory councils that are made up of a diverse cross-section of the small and medium businesses that we serve. This gives us a way to test, what we want to do with third parties that are more diverse than we are. And then lastly, there is a growing category of businesses that exist to help you with this. There are now AI auditors. There are companies that will work with you to essentially audit your entire process, from gathering of data to deploying technology to the use of technology, to look for cases where you're allowing bias or other trust issues to enter into the process. So I am slightly biased here. I'm mentoring the CEO of this company. It's a great little startup out of Spain. All it does is go into organizations that know that they potentially have some issues with their AI, and they basically audit the process from end to end and help them to identify, how do we correct our processes? How do we fix our data sets? Like, where do we shore up things to ensure that we don't build harmful AI? Edicus isn't the only company out there doing that. Just do a search and you'll find a bunch of them. But you don't have to do it alone, is the point. Okay, so let's move on to product development considerations. So as you're building products that are powered by AI, the first principle is really simple. Don't use AI when you don't have to. There's probably a bunch of technical and developer type people in the room. So there's deterministic technology and there's non-deterministic technology. Deterministic technology, which is the traditional way we build products, means given the same input, the same context, or same state, you will always get the same output. It's perfectly deterministic. You will always get the same answer. And that's the traditional way we've always built software. The problem is you can't account for every use case, right? You can't account for the myriad ways that people want to do things, which then leads to the non-deterministic programming, which is where AI comes in, right? It doesn't have to fully understand the problem. You don't have to fully understand state. Deterministic programming, traditional programming, is really cool. It's really good. It gives you exactly what you want. Don't use AI when you can use good old-fashioned ways of developing software. First principle, a lot of people, when they get into AI, they want to use it to solve every problem. It's not the right solution for every problem. Number 2 is really changing your philosophy for user experience design. So if we go back like 10 years, when I would talk to large prospects, who had large accounting teams or finance teams, when they looked at our UI, what they were looking at was how efficient do they think their users are going to be at repetitive tasks? How quickly are those users going to learn how to do something and then do it in a repetitive way in the product? We had one large company that really challenged us to knock 10 seconds off the time it took a user to enter a bill. And that's how they valued us. Now, fast forward to today, and we use AI to automate all the data entry for bills. We use AI to automate the classification of the bills, for looking for problems, for matching to purchase orders. So the objective of UX design can no longer be user efficiency. It has to be user confidence, right? And so this has to be a mantra in the way you design products where AI is the core technology. It's no longer about efficiency, it's about confidence. Am I making good decisions? Is the technology doing what it's supposed to do? Number 2, ask yourself the question, when you are using AI, what's the benefit? Is it accuracy or is it productivity. So I'll give you an example. We built some AI 3 or 4 years ago for subscription-based businesses that was able to forecast renewals, right? So you've got an annual contract, you've got 1,000 customers, you look at a lot of factors about that customer's business, and it could forecast whether or not they were going to renew. And when we went into this, our hypothesis was that we could forecast more accurate than our customers could, which would be hugely valuable in the way that they plan out their business. What we actually found was that in some cases the AI was more accurate. In some cases it was nearly as accurate. It was kind of a, it was pretty even. However, the customers who were testing this for us were able to do it up to 2 or 3 times a day. Whereas without AI, at most they could do this once a quarter because it's such a time-consuming exercise. And so what that means is, hey, even if we get close to the accuracy of a human on this, the fact that I can run it every single day and know in real time when my forecast changes, when something's changed in my business that I can react to, that there is the power, right? So this is a really important question because it then gets into how do you design the outcome for customers. So the other example is a capability that it's got the world's greatest name. I named it myself. I decided not to go to marketing because if they don't know how to name products. It's called General Ledger Outlier Detection. So this was our first major AI investment at Sage. And what it does is it basically monitors the flow of transactions through a business. It develops an understanding of the normal patterns in that business. And then when a transaction falls outside those patterns, it flags it, right, as an outlier needing review. And our original intention was to do all this in real time with every transaction, and every time we found an anomaly, to send a real-time notification to a controller or somebody who would go in and review it. That turned out to be an awful, awful thing to do, right? Because the real value of this capability was not accuracy. The real value is that accounting teams just don't have the horsepower to review every transaction at the level of detail that they need to. And so what we did instead was we applied the technology to the approval process of transactions, and rather than trying to show them some UI that confidently says, you got a problem here, right? The UI instead says, hey, take a look at this. It's a little weird. You've got, I think here, salaries coded in the wrong place, right? This combination of dimensions is weird. So rather than setting an outcome of, we're going to catch all the bad transactions, you set the outcome of AI is going to be your support through the process. It's probably going to capture 100 fine transactions for everyone that's wrong. But if it identifies even one that would have got through otherwise, it's provided the value. So it completely changes the way you design the UI. Users have to feel in control. So with that underlying technology, our engineering team got really confident that what they could do is use those patterns to understand when it's okay to just pay a vendor with no human review, right? Imagine that you're so confident in the bills that come in from a vendor, the accuracy of the bills, the approval process is completely rock solid. You get to a point where you can use AI to make a determination to keep a human out of the process and just pay the bill. Now think about that woman from the paving stone company and what she would feel about us telling her that we can use AI to pay all her bills for her, right? It's a non-starter. So you have to think, now how do I complement the AI with the human to create a process that really adds value? Here's an example of how we've done that in the UI. This is a product called Sage Inbox. Inbox basically allows an accounting team to route all of their inbound emails to one product. It looks at the intention of the inbound email, so it uses AI to classify, what's the intent? Is this an invoice from a vendor? Is this a request for compliance information from a customer? And based on that, it kicks off workflows, which might be an email response. And so what the AI is doing is it's automating the workflow, right? In this case, it has suggested a response. It's attached the invoice to the email to return. But just look at the language that we're using here. We're basically saying you're still in control. We've done all the automation for you. We've suggested a response, but if it doesn't feel right to you, you can change it, do whatever you want. Right? So it's little cues like that in the UI that just remind the customer that we want them to feel like they're in control. Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about this because this is just well documented out there on the internet. You can, in fact, a little admission here. I was a little pressed for time on this slide. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, please help me with a slide that talks about transparent AI. And after a couple iterations with it, I had to really tell it to not be so verbose with the answers. I just wanted a few bullet points. But these are super important. This is well documented, well researched. Go look up the transparent AI standards when you're building with AI. It's really, really important in preserving customer trust. And then the last thing on this topic of product design is you've got to consider accessibility. As technology companies who are accepting more responsibility, we've got to accept responsibility for the users who have disabilities, right? And if you go out and you look at some of the standards like the Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, again, I use ChatGPT to help. There are well-defined guidelines for how to design the use of a product to support disabled people. I was on a call with our DEI council at Sage yesterday, and one of our external advisory members said, you know what, that design is just good, period, right? A lot of the stuff that's in that standard is just good design, period, right? So go to the standards, they're super helpful, and that's sort of don't forget that there's a whole population of people who are struggling already to use technology. All right, so ultimately, this is what we want to say confidently to our customers. Now remember, our customers are CFOs, they're accountants, they're the head of people. Their whole job is to make sure the company's compliant, to make sure that stakeholders are making confident decisions. They're in the trust business. So if I can't say that we will never use AI in a way that erodes their trust in Sage or our products, if I can't say that, they're not going to trust us, right? And they won't use the products. So that should be the goal, to say that. All right, moving on. Trust the company. Doesn't matter how good your tech is, how safe it is, how secure, right? So losing customer trust, it isn't just bad for the trust of the product. It can really destroy enterprise value in the company. If you look at our big strategy papers, so we've got a long-term strategy paper that talks about how Sage is going to be the winner in the future. And it lists our competitive assets, what we're going to use to win. And the very first thing it says is that data is the most valuable asset we have, but our access to that data depends on trusted customer relationships. And so this kind of gets back to that principle that when you're building AI capabilities, you can't do it without your customers, right? You might have the world's greatest treasure chest of highly reliable, trusted data, but if your customers take that access away from you, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't have to be in the product. It could be something that you do that has nothing to do with technology. And part of this is not being corporate, right? This is why I took the time to say to you at the beginning that our purpose to knock down barriers so everyone can thrive, we didn't hire McKinsey to come up with that, right? We didn't hire the great branding companies to come up with that. This was something that came from us, right? What we really, really believe. And when I choose to speak in front of an audience like this, I don't use, as you can probably tell, I don't use notes or a script because a technologist smells fakery, right? A mile away, and it's such an easy way to lose trust. So companies need to be transparent. They need to admit when they make mistakes. They need to speak like people. They need to be authentic. And when they are authentic with their customers, not only do they retain that trust, but there's a magic beyond that. And that is that they give you space and freedom to innovate. So another story here. In the early days, building Intact, we had a lot of customers coming to us saying, you need to add a 13th month to your calendar. That sounds crazy, right? But most accounting products, legacy products at the time, had a 13th month calendar. And if we had just done what our customers asked us to do, we would have put a 13th month in there and perpetuated a dumb idea. So we really dug in to understand, what's the problem the customers are trying to solve by adding a 13th month? Well, it so happens that in a business, there are transactions that can skew your ability to compare your performance over a calendar year. And so what companies want to do is they want to put those transactions into a 13th month, this fictional month, so that it doesn't skew the results across the year. So we came up with something very, very different. We said, well, we're going to give you multi-books. It was a completely different solution than what they were asking for, but because we had that relationship with them, we tried things in the past that hadn't worked, but we owned up to it, right? We worked with our customers. They accepted this, and it turned out to be one of the game-changing innovations in the product. So you got to know your customer. Another example here, when you behave in a way that reflects that you really don't understand who your customers are and what they sort of value about your product, you can destroy so much trust and value. I don't know if there's any Snapchat users in the room. There were 3 million less Snapchat users after the redesign in 2018. Basically, they decided that to continue growing the business, they needed to split two of the core features in the product. They needed to separate them from each other. Sorry, no, they were separate. They needed to bring them together. That's what they did. And for the first quarter ever in Snapchat's history, their user growth actually, it wasn't that it didn't grow anymore, it actually declined, right? They lost 3 million users. And then they did the unthinkable. They said, no, you know what? They just need time with it. In other words, our customers are wrong. Our users are wrong. They just need more time with us. I can't remember what their market value was at the time, but they lost $1.8 billion of market cap over that period as well. And they ultimately ended up going back to that design. And ultimately what's behind this is they didn't truly understand their customers, right? They didn't know what they valued about the product that they were using. Okay, lastly on this topic, don't create conflicting business models. Let me give you an example from Sage. We've got hordes, and we have 2.5 million small and medium-sized businesses around the world running on our products. The data that they put into our systems is incredibly valuable, right? They're using that to prove their compliance. They're using it to get credit. It is already well-trusted, well-structured data that we could do a ton with, including, hey, why don't we sell it? That's a lot of great data there. I bet you there's some people that would like to buy this data. If we did that, that would be a huge conflict to the existing business, and only one business model would survive, right? You can't have both of those business models survive. Now, the term for this, when it happens, this is a technical term, is enshittification. Now, I didn't put it on the slide because I didn't want to get in trouble. So has anybody heard of the technical term enshittification? So enshittification is when a company takes a lot of investment to build network effects, right? Scaled network. They build a great customer experience that leads them to have that great scaled network. And then they take advantage of the scale they've built to launch new business models that actually wreck what they had built in the first. So lastly, what can we do to use tech to create trust? And there's all kinds of things that we can do with AI. But I guess the point is, first of all, that trust is incredibly valuable if you can create it, right? There are two industries that exist today on the basis of creating trust, right? The first is the audit industry. The big four, the PwCs and the Deloittes and the Ernst & Youngs, the KPMGs, collectively, they collected $217 billion of audit fees in 2021. And that $217 billion of audit fees earned point-in-time trust, right? It's an annual audit. They issue a statement, and it was done after the fact. Imagine how much the audit industry would be worth if that was continuous, right? If it was real time. Far more than $217 billion. The credit card industry exists there's other things they're providing, but fundamentally, they're underwriting business transactions. And they're able to collect a 1.5 to 3.5% tax to underwrite those transactions. So the point of all of this is if you could create trust, it's worth a lot. What can we do with AI? I actually don't want to focus on AI. There are some things you can do. We're using it to find anomalies and outliers, detect fraud, right? There's a lot you can do with AI, but it gets back to this point that AI ultimately is non-deterministic, right? It is replicating human decision-making, which is flawed. So what we want to do is use other technologies that are designed for trust to add trust. So one good example is replacing human processes with digital processes. We have a product in the market called employment verification. So with employment verification, around the world, we probably have 20 million employees that are paid by Sage payroll products. So what we're doing is we're taking all their pay slips from those payroll products, putting them into a network that then allows banks to access the digital pay history for individuals who are applying for loans. And what that does is it takes humans out of the decision-making process or out of the loop when you've got to verify their employment. They just go onto the network, they call the service, right? They trust us, they trust the data. It's done, right? So we can use these kinds of digital, there's no AI whatsoever in this, right? It is a fully digital process. The other is blockchain, right? There's a ton you can do with blockchain. The one I want to call out that maybe is less well known is self-sovereign IDs. So look it up if you have a chance. It's a way for us to get back our privacy when it comes to our identities online. And smart contracts are a way to make our markets more fair. If a smart contract says, I will get paid when goods are delivered, it doesn't matter if I'm a minority-owned business, a female-owned business, a white-owned business, the rules are the same, the contract executes. Right, so there are technologies that can create fairness in markets. So to just wrap it up here, the story that I told you at the beginning essentially was talking to a customer. I tried to understand from her why she wasn't using this really, really powerful capability that would have saved her a lot of time, and she said, no, I'm not going to use it because I don't trust it. So what I want to wrap on is a good story with this general ledger outlier detection, that we use AI to find problems, and we always look for customer quotes. This is a good one. I mean, it caught a clerical error that would have caused them to overstate their revenue by $350K, which is going to destroy confidence of your stakeholders. But more importantly, Aaron was able to say that the entire company trusts the finance organization now. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. That's it. Thank you, guys.